Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Thank you very much for joining me today. I hope that no matter what you're doing, you're having a beautiful time of it. So today I want to show you how to create a series of different techniques which can all be used together in a large project, all in the same item. Now this is based on a necklace or a collar that I made several years ago called Flaming June, and I want to share with you all of the different things that you need to create the piece that's currently on the board. Now I'm using a beautiful bead mix from Jessie James, and this one is called Nevertheless She Persisted, which I really like the idea behind. Definitely a beautiful blend of beads. You of course can use whatever beads that you like. I will drop you a link at the bottom of the video description if you want to grab yourself some that are like these, but as I say, you can use really any beads that you like. Now I have chosen to thread mine onto some ribbon. If you were to use a beading thread instead, obviously you can use many of the much smaller beads. I've just chosen some of the larger beads simply because it's really quite an impactful piece and it goes so well with the little mini projects that we're going to learn today. If you'd like to pop down to the board with me, I'll show you the complete piece all together. So this is the project that we're going to be creating today. I've used a bead mix in which you get a beautiful pendant, lots of sparkle, some pearl type beads and lots of different spacers and interesting different bits and bobs. Now I've got lots and lots left over from the single pot, but you also get these really beautiful gossamer-like faux insect wings, which are absolutely stunning. Now I'm going to show you each of these individual techniques, but I wanted to talk to you about the materials first. I've chosen to work with a semi-hard silver plated copper core wire. For my main section, because I wanted to add a little bit of texturing to it, I chose a heavier gauge, which is 16 gauge or 1.25mm wire, to create the main focal bead. Now when I made the rest of them, I sized that down to 18 gauge, which is 1mm size, and that means also you get to use different beads. You just choose what goes on the core of the wire that you've chosen. As I said, I've used ribbon, but you can use beading thread and go whatever way you really want to. So this is the piece that we're going to learn all the individual pieces for. I do need to move that out of the way so we can crack on. So for the central piece, I have got around about 12 inches of the 1.25mm or 16 gauge wire, and I'll be using my bent chain nose pliers and my round nose or bail makers at this stage. So I've got all my tools to hand, hopefully they won't fall on the floor. I'm just going to put some lovely heat into all of that wire so that it's nice and smooth, and also a little bit more flexible. Now we don't need a huge amount of wire at the top because these are going to be interchangeable between the main necklace. I've decided to use an openable loop for the centerpiece. What I do want to do though is make sure that that's flush cut at the end so that that doesn't cause me any problems later. So I'm going to pop around about 2 inches down from the end there, and that just gives me plenty of wire to change my mind. A really sharp right angle to begin with. Now you can hold on with your pliers if you want to, or you can switch to gripping by hand. It's entirely up to you. So I'm putting a lovely lot of warmth into this to create a nice curve, and then the curve comes back slightly in the opposite direction. Now these could be perceived as petals or leaves or even feathers. It's entirely up to you. Quite often when I make this design, I will put a really sharp point on the end and squish that up together. But today I want to leave a really nice soft turn so that we can add more onto the bottom of that leaf or petal if we'd like to. So got my pliers into position and I'm just pushing the wire back on in the same direction that it came from, but not too sharply. So again, it's just the warmth of my hand, which, believe it or not, in England today, it's actually quite toasty. It's been a long time coming, my friends. So a little bit of curvature to get a basic reflection of that style and size. What I like to do here is grip hold of the tail of wire over the front of the neck section, which is where I want to bend this wire around. So if I just draw that all the way around the back of the design, push that together as best I can by hand, and then give it a little extra squeeze with the pliers, very, very gently, just to put a definitive curl around that core wire. So I want to continue in the same direction. Because I'm using the heavier wire, I'm going to allow my pliers to help me just to draw that around. You can put as many coils up here as you like. Some petals or leaves have a slightly longer neck, entirely up to you. It's whatever your vision makes it to become. So I'm just going to tighten those coils up slightly, grip that section, and then take the wire all the way around for a second time. Allow the pliers to help you, and then back over the front. Give that a squeeze. So I'm going to put some more warmth into the wire now, because when you have been putting those curls into position around that neck or the core wire, it affects the hardness or brittleness of the wire further down the line. So just a little bit more warmth coming through here. Give that a bit of a squeeze, make sure I'm happy. And then what I'm going to do is turn the whole thing upside down. Use again the warmth of my body just to draw that across and down and away. It's almost reflecting what is currently the right hand side, that kind of curvature. And then I'm going to pull that back at the last minute so that it comes back to where it came from. So we've got a little bit of an S-bend there. Now quite often I will do a straight line down the centre so that it looks like the veining on a leaf, but today I wanted to do something a little bit different. I want it to come away at the side so that we've got this very gentle section at the bottom which we can add other designs onto. So once I'm happy with the positioning of my swoosh, I'm going to trim that away to around about 1/4 of an inch. Looks to be about 6 or 7 millimeters. Keep your offcuts for later, you never know when you can use those. And what we're going to do is just put a little gentle bend there. And I'm going to show you a couple of variations with what you can do on here. So up at the top, what I want to do is take this section and make it into an open loop. So I'm going to grip quite closely above where we've created that coil, bring in a forwards bend. If you're using a large ribbon, you'll want to create quite a large form for it. So I'm going to go for probably the 4th size up, roll those about halfway round, and then bring the tail around to meet. So you get a really nice shape and form. What you then need to do is take the flush side of your flush cutters, line it up with the bottom part of that hoop shape that we've created, trim that away, make sure that you put that safely in your scrap pot, and then you can see we've got an open loop for the time being. What I want to do is get that nice and flat, and I'm going to squeeze that a few times just to give some strength and rigidity to it. What we're doing here is we're kind of creating a mechanic. So this will now have a couple of times that you can open like so, add it onto your pendant, your necklace piece, and close that up. So for me, probably 3 or 4 times, and I'd be quite happy with how that works. Now with the section that we've got coming around here, we have 2 different design ideas. For this next section, I'm going to show you 2 different variations based on what we've done so far. So if you'd like to join me back down at the board, I'll show you the first one. So for this piece, what I'd like to do is replicate this design. So we're going to leave this little vein section open, and we're going to add in some 0.4 or 26 gauge wire. And what I'm going to do is start by wrapping that around really anywhere on the wire to begin with. We want to have lots and lots of grip for this, so I would probably go for at least 10 wraps or so. I've only done a few there, before cutting the end away and trimming that so that the very end is hidden inside as much as possible. And then I'd slide that all the way up to the top. And then what we can do is add on as many or as few, and this is where using the smaller hole beads from the pack really works well. So I'm just going to show you a couple of these. Allow the bead to sit down against the spine that we've created. Now, as I say, I would probably fill this whole section with wire wrapping. So just continue to coil that finer gauge wire all the way until you filled this top section. Drop your first bead in and then wrap around. So finer wire from the top through the bead, take the tail of the wire underneath, and I'm going to go for 3 times because I like how that works. I'm just going to grab a second one of those, pop the bead on the end of the tail of wire, allow that to sit down into position, and then draw all the way around so the wire's coming over the top through the bead underneath, and then helter-skeltering all the way around. So that's 3 wraps, and I will fill the entirety until we get to just shy of the frame wire that we've created. And at this juncture, what I will do is I will take that little end bit, bend it over just little by little, because we're working with quite firm strength wire. So I'm creating almost a hook shape here. If I flip that over, hopefully you'll be able to see that. I'm going to take that very end section and just squish it down so that it meets the underside of itself, creating a sealed look, as it were. Give that a squeeze, imagining that we filled all of these in. It's much easier to put the beads onto the core wire first before we put the end into position. Much easier to get that done first. So if I just push that wire through, it'll be slightly tidier and I can deal with putting that away later. So that's one of the first ideas. Again, you'll notice that it's tied slightly to one side over here, and there's a nice soft curve at the bottom onto which we can add other segments later. Now, the alternative for this design, let me just pop this one in here, one I prepared earlier. I haven't done the loop at the top, but that's fine. You've seen how to do that. What we would do is we would take a larger core bead, and I believe that these beautiful sparkly ones from the Nevertheless She Persisted bead mix fit, and yes they do. So I would fill the entirety of the spine itself with these beautiful sparkly beads. I'd hesitate to use gemstone or glass for this. These are, I'm not entirely sure, possibly a resin. Once I'd filled the entirety of the spine, you'll see again that this was trimmed maybe 1/4 of an inch over the side, and I'll do exactly the same thing. I will add a little hanging loop at the bottom there, give that a nice little push to bring that all together. So there are your 2 variations for the main drop section, and in a moment I'll show you the other pieces and also how to add on at the bottom here. So in just a few moments, I'll show you some components which you can add onto the bottom of either of those main focal leaf drops. But for now, I'm going to show you one of the pieces that I used over and over again in this design, which is the very, very simple leaf design that has a single bead at the top, and I will show you that now. So this is the technique that we're going to look at next. If I just drop the entire piece back into position for a second, it's repeated in a couple of different ways all the way around the design. So you can see the 2 on either side on the outside are almost identical, and then the 2 that are either side of your main focal piece just have an additional drop. The technique itself is exactly the same, you just need to allow slightly more wire in this position. So if I just grab that back out of the way, and we can make one of these. Now I'm working with, let's have a look, it's 18 gauge wire, which is 1mm gauge. Again, it's a half hard silver plated copper wire. Just going to give that a little bit of a smooth to get some warmth into it. Now, if I'm making lots of these that I want to have in the same size, what I will do is I will cut several pieces of wire all exactly the same length, and these are around about the 8 to 9 inch mark. And I will make sure that I put little right angle bends on the end. It's around about 1.75 inches to 2 inches at this section. And then the remaining sort of 6 or 7 inches is coming down in this orientation. So you would just need to make sure that all of your sections of wire are the same length. So that's easy enough to do. You can measure it exactly, or you can take it off the reel bit by bit and line them all up. And if you get all those prepared before you start, you'll know that they're all exactly the same size, which means that these should end up approximately the same size. So if I just pop that up here for the moment, it's flipped over onto its back. So we've created that first right angle bend. What we're going to do now is add a little wrapped loop at the top. Now you can do this with your your round nose pliers or your bail makers. You don't need to have a massive hole at the top for the material to go through unless you're using a very, very broad material. So I'll probably go for the second size and just bring the bail makers into position so that I've got half a circle all the way round, and then draw that tail all the way round. So you may sometimes need to just modify that slightly just so that it sits neatly. Once you've got that circular position, what we're going to do next is wrap 1.5 times. So if I'm making lots of these, and for the Flaming June collar I did make loads, I will get them all to the same position in the production line. So I'll end up with bunches of them all sat like this, the right number of pieces of wire. And at that way I can just check that they all look the same before I move on to the next part of the technique. So because my beading material is going to go through from left to right, what I'm going to do is take a second to make sure that that wire is coming off at a right angle. And I'm happy with how that all looks and that it's very similar to the other pieces. So I would probably switch to my round nose pliers to do this next section. We've got just under an inch at the moment to play with. So I'll come in with the tip of the pliers and start to create a bit of a loop shape or a coil. Now quite often you can make this with a much larger coil, but I decided that the way this works is it sits over the surface of the bead. Now I've done an alternative bead on this one, which is almost the colour of pyrite, which is really pretty. But I'm going to show you how that looks with the same bead that I used in the main feature necklace. So we apply the bead at the bottom, slide that all the way up to the top, and with caution we're going to grab hold of that partly made coil. Going to take it over the surface of the bead and just push that down into position so that it almost snuggles and nestles into that bead. I think it's a really beautiful look, and it just seems to work very, very well when you're repeating over and over again. So the next thing I'm going to do is grip on the neck of the wire just beneath where the bead sits. The beads come all the way to the wrapped loop at the top there, and I'm now just going to repeat the same design that we started with. And this is where having your production line will help you, because it means that you can get the same size over and over again. So I've got my first little arc going on, coming down to the bottom, creating that little soft loop at the bottom and drawing that all the way around back over the top. And if that doesn't sit quite symmetrically, just take your time and you can get that to be a little bit more perfect for you. Now you could hang charms off the bottom of all of these if you wanted to, but for me I'm just going to wrap a couple of times around the neck underneath the bead to support it. What I'm going to do here is grip hold of the wire, and I'm just gripping hold of the one side, not pushing two bits together. And I'm just going to take that tail around to begin with, like so, so that that starts to sit into position. Give that a bit of a squeeze, take that across the back, trim away, and then give it a squish so that it sits neatly. Again, this is a useful size of wire, so I'm going to put that to one side. And on the back, we're just going to take the tail and tuck that up against the bead carefully. If you're working with cut crystal gemstones, be respectful of the ends of the wires going against those beads. So with this section of the design, it's really quite restful because you can sit there and you can make dozens of them. It makes for an amazing collar if you do make dozens of them. And as I mentioned to you before, the two that are either side of the central feature piece have got an extended drop. So whereby we only added one bead on this occasion, you could add multiple beads, and then what you see is a difference in the length where the bottom sits of each of those charms. So you could go for long, short, and alternate between them. It's a really lovely effect. So these are just two opportunities to make slightly different looking but the same technique that you can add and layer up multiple times. So I just need to pop this out of the way, and we'll move on to the next technique, which is just to make a tiny little section which adds as an extender. Now with this one, it's just an open and close loop because it's not very heavy at all. It will keep very, very safe. And I've added a coil on the bottom into which you can add another open and close loop, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. So let me find the right piece of wire. I've got some 1mm or 18 gauge here. I just need to trim away the end ever so slightly. What I'm going to do is start with my round nose pliers and create a coil at the bottom. This can be as large or as small as you like. My coils all seem to go in the same direction because I'm right dominant. So switching to my flat facing pliers, drawing that all the way around, I'm going to go, I think, for 2 coils. Give that a bit of a squeeze, get a nice straight angle coming up, and then we're going to choose some beads to use. So I think we're going to go for one of these lovely, almost Sleeping Beauty blue beads. We're going to add one of the pyrite colour beads, and then we'll top that off with another one of these Sleeping Beauty colour beads. So we've got a little extender, very, very gently at the top, very close to the end of my pliers. If I flip that through 90 degrees, I'm going to put a forwards bend on. You can use either your bail makers or your round nose pliers. And what I want is a really large open and closable loop, and I'll show you for why in a second. So halfway around, take the tail over the top, remove your pliers, come in with your flush cutters to create that open and close loop. Make sure you cut the correct wire, otherwise it's very sad. And then give that a bit of a squish. Now what we can do now is open up that section that we just used and pop that into the loop on the bottom of another piece. So whoops-a-daisy, that's gone all twisty. So I'm just going to close up that loop, and it's just like opening and closing a jump ring. Give that a squeeze, and then that's how you add extender drops from an open and close loop at the top to a coil at the bottom, and that's why we need to make that open and close loop at the top rather large. We've just got 2 mini techniques left, and these are so useful when you're making pieces that involve lots of movement and lots of different things coming together. They're very easy to repeat rather, so you can make dozens and dozens of them when you're on a bit of a slump. If you fancy something to do but you don't want to be challenged overly, you can make lots of these and keep them ready for when you do a large project where you're making something like this giant collar. So if you pop back down to the board, I'll show you those last 2 techniques now. So for this, I'm going to use again the 18 gauge or 1mm wire. And for the first section, I'm going to show you how to make a little coil spacer. Now these are really, really easy to make. You've got a couple of different designs of bail makers. Ones that I've got at my other workbench have got only 2 rods, and they're the same size all the way along. My 6-step bail makers are absolutely superb as well. So I'm going to choose the second size. We're using the 1mm or 18 gauge, and I'm just starting to coil around, very, very gently opening and closing the pliers. I'm trying not to mark it too intensely. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a coil, and as I'm doing that, I'm able to slide it up. It's not so tight that it's gripping the metal of the pliers. And what I like to do is repeat the same number of coils every time, so you've got the same distance, the same dimension of bead. So I've started just here. So what I want to do is go a little bit past the space at which I start. So I'm going to cut that away very, very cautiously with my flush cutters. And then if you flip that over to the other side, you'll see that you can find the position where the wire starts and try to match that on the other end. Flush cutters in the opposite direction. Let's get rid of that little tiny part there. So you can see that those 2 are now in the same position, and they're the flush side of that cut. And you can repeat those. This was done on my other set of bail makers, but you can repeat them and store them and then just keep them for a rainy day when you want to do some bits and bobs. The other final technique now you can do with any scraps. We had some hefty scraps of offcut earlier, which was with the 16 gauge 1.25, or you can make it with the 18 gauge, which is the 1mm. These are so easy but so effective, and when you've got dozens and dozens of them in the same piece, they can sound really beautiful as well. And I like having another aspect to jewellery making where you can hear it as well as see it and feel it. So I've got a section here, and I will want to just check that that's the correct side of the flush cutters. And pop that out of the way so I don't accidentally hurt myself with it later. round nose pliers very close to the end, and we're going to create a coil that spins twice around. So once I've got that coil started, I'm going to switch to my flat facing pliers, like so. Draw that all the way around. That's a double. I think we'll go for a triple actually. So let's see if we can make something that looks similar to the other one. Now I'm putting sideways pressure, holding the coil flat, and then pulling the wire in this direction so that it sits snugly against the next coil inside. So I'm going to stop at the point where we started, grip the coil really firmly across the center, and then pull the wire away at 90 degrees. And then what we can do is, you could use these as wrapped loops if you wanted to, but what I'm going to do is just a very quick open loop using my round nose pliers. So get them into position to make the first half of that circle, take the tail all the way around, and then we're going to trim just here. I think I trimmed that ever so slightly too small, but what we're going to do is make that fit before we give that a really hearty squeeze. Now, my recommendation would be, if you're going to use a lighter weight beading thread, maybe do these as a wrapped loop, which I showed you earlier at the top of the first section. So those are all the different mini techniques that you need to create your own hoping for summer collar. They're so pretty and they're endlessly customizable. You can use any beads you like, but I will drop a link in for the Jessie James bead mix with that beautiful dragonfly style pendant and the insect wings, the sort of gossamer faux insect wings. They're not real ones. It's all good. I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial today, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Thank you so much for having me. Bye for now.